Hello and welcome to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host and City Manager Doug Bartosh, and I'm here today with Tom Whitmer, who's our Director of Water Resources, Natural Resources, although it's really all water. I don't think you're out there collecting rocks for us or anything like that.
But not recently.
But I thought it would be a good time to bring Tom in and talk about water, not only in the state of Arizona, but kind of regionally, and maybe start off in particular with California and kind of what's going on over there. And you read about it in the paper that if Lake Mead gets to a certain level, we lose our Colorado River allocations and those kind of things. So how serious is it in California based on your knowledge, and then how does that impact Arizona?
It's a good question. As far as California is concerned, it's very serious. Unlike Arizona, which put into play in 1980 a Groundwater Management Act to regulate groundwater usage, at least in the primary metropolitan areas, California has not had any type of groundwater regulations in place. In fact, they've just now recently enacted groundwater regulations, but they really don't go into full play until 2016 or 2020. So even though they put some measures in place to try and help out the situation, they really don't come into place until I think 2020 is when it's fully enacted. But California, they've got two primary major surface water sources: the Colorado River, of course, as we do as well here, and then of course the Bay Delta area, the Sacramento River and so on. And they've been hit harder from a drought perspective than Arizona has. I mean, they've really been hit hard. I mean, we've been in a drought since late 1990s, 96, 97, to present time. They as well, but theirs have been much more severe. The Sierras have really lacked in snow cover, and that's really hurt them tremendously in terms of the surface water runoff. So California's in big trouble in terms of their actual water use at this point in time, and the fact that they haven't really put into play any type of regulations on the groundwater side. So it's been pretty much a free-for-all over there, and therefore they're feeling the pain of it right now and having to really scramble to try and catch up, because there's nothing worse than playing catch-up when it comes to water. How does that affect Arizona? It really doesn't. I mean, I hear a lot of rhetoric out there saying, oh my gosh, California's going to take Arizona's water. And they're referring to the Colorado River, of course. And California's not going to take Arizona's water. They can't take Arizona's water. What is happening right now is there's an operating plan right now in place that the Bureau of Reclamation has been tasked with overseeing that operating plan. And when the elevations in Lake Mead and Lake Powell get to certain levels, that triggers certain actions on the part of the Bureau of Reclamation and on the use of Colorado River water. Right now, there hasn't been a declaration of shortage on the river. If we continue at the rate we're going at this point in time with the runoff that we had this last year from this last runoff cycle up in the Rockies, there's a good potential that we could see a declaration of shortage in January of this year. That's generally when the Bureau comes out and makes their evaluation, analysis, and ultimate declaration of whether there's a shortage or not. If that comes into play, current projections are that we'd go into a level 1 trigger point, or a phase 1, and what that does is it ultimately would reduce Arizona's CAP allocation, not the Colorado River allocation so much, but the CAP portion of the Colorado River allocation. And why is that? Well, the reason for that is when we were building the CAP canal, if you recall back in the beginning in the late 60s when it was actually authorized.
I don't think I was born by then.
Oh, okay. Well, we got halfway into the project, and we were looking for additional funding to complete that project, and California came along, and by virtue of having as much power as they do in Congress, they pretty much put a stop to that additional funding unless Arizona was willing to give up some concessions. And the concession we gave up was our seniority to the Colorado River rights. So as far as the CAP portion of Arizona's Colorado River allocation, when we go into a phase 1 trigger point after that declaration, there's a small cut to the CAP portion of the allocation. And that cut is strictly to the agricultural community. And some people say, oh my gosh, that could really hurt the agricultural community. Well, not really. In Arizona, you've got basically the Yuma area, which is a primary agricultural area. There they don't use CAP water. They have a Colorado River allocation that is just as senior as California's is. So they're not going to see a cut even in that first phase of a declaration of shortage. It will just mean those agricultural areas that receive CAP water through the CAP canal would have to take a cut. But the way it's set up, these farmers originally, they were operating off of groundwater. So they have accrued groundwater credits over time by not utilizing them. They have rights to that groundwater. So they, to offset that shortage that may have come as a result of CAP, they could still go ahead and pump. And that's what's anticipated. Even at a phase 2, it still doesn't impact the CAP municipal or M&I municipal and industrial usage allocations. Still doesn't have any effect on them at all. So California's not going to steal Arizona's water. They can't steal Arizona's water. They're bound. They still are bound by their 4.4 million acre feet of allocation from the Colorado River. They still can't exceed that. So they'll just continue using that by virtue of the fact that Arizona now has a junior CAP right to California. So that's kind of where it stands right now in terms of where the status of California.
Well, and I guess the next question is how well prepared is Arizona, for, if it got really extreme? And
actually, Arizona's doing very well. That's one thing you can say about Arizona. When it's come to water, we've always had the foresight to try and plan and get ahead of the curve when it comes to water. We recognize that we live in a desert here for the most part. Or at least some of our early leadership did. I'm not sure the general populace knows that, but at least some of our early leadership. And by virtue of that fact, we were able to do things like get the CAP canal built. And over the time since the CAP canal has been built, by virtue of the Groundwater Management Act and Arizona Department of Water Resources and actions by the different entities associated with the Water Banking Authority, Arizona has been banking their CAP allocation that they couldn't utilize. In the early days of the CAP when it was first built, they couldn't fully utilize the entire allocation that they had. So not wanting that to go to waste and also trying to show that we were putting that to beneficial use just to protect it more than anything else, we started recharging that back into the ground. And over the last 20 years, Arizona has probably put into the ground more than 8 million acre feet of water down in those metropolitan Phoenix, Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima areas. That's huge. If you look at that, that is a tremendous amount of water. When you look at the entire state's water supply, our water demand that we use is somewhere around 7 million acre feet of both surface and groundwater. They've banked, like I said, more than 8 million acre feet of water in the last 20 years just down in that 3-county area down there. So they're sitting pretty good.
For our non-water people, what is an acre foot of water?
325,851 gallons is what that is. Most people say 326,000 gallons. It's a lot of water. It's enough for 7 or 8 people to live on pretty easily based upon water use trends here in Arizona. So it's pretty good. As far as the rest of Arizona, we've got areas of the state that the drought has impacted more than others, but fortunately the state of Arizona, by virtue of having some of the best groundwater basins in the United States, they've been able to easily continue pumping without having significant impacts up to this point in time. The continuation of the drought, if it stays in place another 20 or 30 years, we could see some serious impacts in some areas in the state. But for the most part, Arizona's sitting pretty good when it comes to water. You might find some isolated areas that have some problems, but overall, Arizona's doing really quite well. And here in the Verde Valley, we're doing extremely well. We have tremendous amount of groundwater reserves. Of course, we don't want to do anything that will jeopardize or impact the river. And so, at least in Cottonwood for sure, we're doing as much as possible to make sure that we don't have any impacts by our pumping.
And before we get into that, let's go ahead and take our first break, and we'll come back and talk about how all of this is impacting the Verde Valley, and in particular Cottonwood. Come back and join us.
taught him how to hit a baseball, how to hit a receiver, the strike zone, the net. You taught him how to hit the upper corner. You even taught him how to hit the open man. But how much time have you spent teaching him what not to hit?
Welcome back to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host, Doug Bartosh, and I'm here with our Director of Water Resources, Tom Whitmer. And I should also mention that Tom has been in the water business for quite some time and started with, I think it was SRP, wasn't it?
Right.
And then went to the Arizona Department of Water Resources and really was responsible for all the rural water issues around the state. So Tom is a virtual encyclopedia of water information. And probably more importantly, you're what, a third, fourth generation Arizona?
Yes, I am. Absolutely, fourth generation.
A very rare breed.
Yeah, in fact, I've got ties even to the Verde Valley. My grandmother was actually born in Jerome back in 1900. So
in the old hospital up there. Huh?
That or in the house, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Who
One
knows?
Or the other. So we talked about California and kind of the state, and I guess really the reality of this situation is that what's happening in California has really no impact on what's happening in the Verde Valley.
Not physical impact. I mean, perhaps the best thing, if there's a best thing that's you can attribute to the California situation, is that it has heightened people's awareness to water, which is always a good thing because we tend to take it for granted and think that as long as water comes out of the faucet, there's got to be a lot more water there. And it's unlimited, and yet water isn't unlimited. It is a finite resource. So perhaps the best thing that's come out of the California thing is that it has heightened people's awareness to the issues related to water. Of course, that you could take that a little bit too far, and people get a little bit paranoid and say, "Oh my gosh, we're running out of water. The sky is falling. Oh heck, what are we going to do?" And that's not a good situation either. But
yeah, because certainly I guess the common sense would tell you is, geez, if California is that bad, Arizona's got to be terrible because their big population centers are all in the desert.
Exactly.
And obviously, from your previous comments, that's not true.
It's not true. And we are sitting very well. I mean, if you go and you check with the Department of Water Resources, they'll confirm everything I'm saying. I mean, they're trying to make sure that people are aware that we are sitting very well, and we've put plans into place that are going to prevent us from having any serious impacts, at least in the near term. Now, like I said, if this drought continues to hang on and linger without any relief at all, things could get interesting down the road. But we're years out from seeing that from occurring, and as we know, we could at any time go back into a 2 or 3 year wet period, and here in the Verde Valley, especially. I mean, you go back to '93 when we had just monstrous flooding issues in here. That alone did amazing things for filling back up the aquifer system here in the valley here. So. Those type of events have a tremendous more amount of impact than most people give them credit for. They think it's just a blowout and it's over and done with, but that's not true. It has an effect on the river
long-term
first 5 to 7 years after the fact.
Yeah.
So,
and I think you can certainly get into obviously a big debate about global warming and climate change and those kind of things, and people feeling like this is the new normal. But I don't think we're at that point yet where we're conceding that, no, this is the new normal. I mean, because you and I had talked about this, and there was a similar drought to this back in the 1950s.
Yeah, we had some of the worst droughts on record, recorded history records at least. The 1950s were unbelievable here in Arizona. If you were around in the 1950s, which I happen to be, I recall as a little kid, talking about how, oh my gosh, we're going to put fines in place if you're out watering your car, if you're, watering your lawn. And of course, we came out of that, and we went through an extremely wet period during the mid 70s to early 80s. You know, and kind of went into a quote-unquote norm, so to speak, until the early 90s. You know, we had that amazingly wet year in 93, 92, 93. Then we kind of started going into this drought in 96, 97, 98, somewhere in that time period. But it doesn't mean we can't have wet periods. 2005 was an extremely wet year.
Yeah, I remember that.
And, you know, people immediately go, oh my gosh, we're good again.
Yeah.
But, you know, here in the Verde Valley, you know, we're blessed to have a tremendous amount of groundwater supply. And there is a connection between the river and the groundwater. How much, what that connectivity is open for debate, and that's what people are trying to do with studies and groundwater models and everything else that they're working on, things that we're working on here in the city. And you know, if you look at what we've done here in Cottonwood in just the last 10 years since acquiring the private water companies, you know, we've managed to reduce the amount of water that we're pumping by more than 30% in just the last 10 years. And you know, people ask, well, how can that be? I mean, your population has gone up over the last 10 years and you're pumping, you know, a third less than what you were pumping 10 years ago. Where was that water going to? Well, I think that the awareness that people have to water has really brought about a change in some of the cultural activities related to water. People don't just go out and start spraying just for the sake of spraying as much as they used to do. That in conjunction with what the city has done by going in and updating and upgrading the system to the point where we now have a much more tight rein on the accountability of that water. Where's it actually going? You know, prior to us taking control of the private water companies, you know, there was a 40% plus lost and unaccounted for water, not knowing where it's going. Is it leaking? Is it just going through meters and not registering? They had no idea where it was going. So we've been able to rein that in as well. And I think all those things in conjunction have really gone a long ways towards, you know, ensuring that whatever we do at the city, at least, we're not going to impact that river, and that we will ensure that we have a sustainable supply to meet the demands of our citizens clear to build out.
And for those who aren't aware of the hydrology in the Verde Valley, where does most of the water come from to kind of resupply the aquifer here?
The vast majority of recharge that comes into the valley here comes in from the mountain fronts. You know, the snowpack that hits upon the Mogollon Rim, and to a much lesser extent the Mingus Mountain Range and so on. All of that snow cap and rainfall that hits on those things comes down, and a percentage of that goes back in as recharge into the valley, into the regional aquifer here that we then pull from to meet the supplies and demands of our customers.
And you mentioned the river, and certainly we all want to see the river keep flowing. And I know there's, in fact, you look on the paper, you know, when it comes out several times a week, and see that they're tracking the flows in the river, what the historical is and current and those kind of things. Should we be concerned about those numbers at this point?
Not well. I guess that's a tough one. It's always good to know where you're at. I mean, you have to know where you're at in order to figure out where you're going. And so it's good to keep track of, but it's nothing to be alarmed at this point in time in regards to what you're seeing. The greatest impact to the river thus far that we've seen from our analysis and all the studies that we've conducted has been as the result of this extended dry period that we've been in, similar to what California's experienced, and the entire Southwest for that matter. That has had the greatest impact on the river, much more so than any pumping that's going on here. It's not to say that pumping can't have a potential impact on the river. It can, but as to what degree and how much, that's the big question. That's the thing that we're trying to figure out with all the studies and modeling that we're doing. But the greatest impact to that river thus far has been from, you know, the extended period of drought. And one could also argue that, you know, the expansion of the riparian forest along that river is a tremendous draw on that river.
Yeah, you certainly look back in historical pictures and you don't see the number of cottonwood trees and all the greenery along the river that we see today, which is beautiful.
Oh, it's fabulous.
But you're right. I mean, it does draw a lot of water.
Yeah, people have a tendency to forget that trees require water too. And not that we're promoting or advocating that we should tear down the trees. We don't. I mean, it's fabulous. It's one of the best, cottonwood riparian forests that you're going to find in the state of Arizona. And We want to definitely try and maintain that as well, but people need to realize that that takes a tremendous demand on the river as well. And in fact, it's the single largest, user of water on that in the river system itself. So
let's go ahead and take our next break, and we'll come back and wrap it up with where's the future for water in the Verde Valley. Come back and join us.
They'll test you, try to break your will. But however loud the loudness gets, however many cheese puffs may fly, you're the driver, the one in control. Stand firm. Just wait. And move only when you hear the click that says they're buckled in for the drive. Never give up till they buckle up.
Welcome back to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host, Doug Bartosh, and here with Tom Whitmer, talking about water in the Verde Valley. And, I guess the big question is, and what everybody gets concerned about, particularly if we grow anymore, which we probably will, there is land that can be developed in the Verde Valley, and I'm not aware of any laws that prevent us or would allow us to tell somebody they can't develop their land. And so Cottonwood is doing as much as we can to prepare for whatever the potential growth is. If it doesn't happen, that's great, but we've got to do the responsible thing and prepare for what could happen. And so I guess the question to Tom would be, how do we do that, and what's the future of water in the Verde Valley, and particularly for Cottonwood?
Yeah, and that's a good question, and you touched on a great point, and that is, we're not very good at predicting population growth, but we can at least still plan for what that population and ultimate water demand would be at build out. And so therein lies how we are approaching this in regards to what Cottonwood's doing. Realizing that we're not very good at predicting exactly when it's going to occur, but we can definitely put plans in place and begin implementing that plan such that we ultimately stay ahead of the curve. As I said before, the last thing we want to do is get into a catch-up game when it comes to water. I've been there, done that when I was working for the Department of Water Resources, and it can get pretty ugly, and people can get pretty upset when they go to that magic faucet and nothing comes out of it. So here at Cottonwood, one of the things that we're doing is, as I said before, we've already reduced our pumping by more than 30% in just the last 10 years. Can we reduce that more? Perhaps a little bit, but we're really, really pushing the limits of where we're ultimately going to be. I mean, right now, our total gallons per capita per daily use is around 95. And if you put that into perspective, that's not just what a person uses. That's taking the total water that you pump and dividing it by your entire population that you serve. Whether it be going for a restaurant, a hospital, a hotel, or to an individual home, it's the total volume of water pumped. So if you go and looked at the individual, it'd be much less than that. But when you figure out the total gallons per capita per daily use, it works out to be about 95. And that puts us in the top tier in the state. I mean, it would put us in the top 1% in the state in terms of your total GPCD, or gallons per capita per daily use in the state.
So in terms of conservation.
Oh, absolutely.
So the top tier, but in terms of the least amount of use.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was good clarification there. In fact, it would put us at the lowest of any any city or community or valley here in the Verde Valley, we have the lowest total GPCD of any of them at this point in time. And we're not resting on our laurels, as I said before. We're trying to even get that down even a little bit more. There's only one community I know, a municipality, that is lower than we are right now, and that would be Payson. Payson is somewhere around the 87 mark. Wow. And you know, that's a goal, that's a pretty lofty goal for us to shoot for, and it's one that we are attempting to shoot for. But in the meantime, you know, we realize that to go much further, we're going to have to do something else. And if we can't really get our number down much more, what we need to do, understand, and what we are doing at the City of Cottonwood, is we're looking at our total resource portfolio, and one of the resources that we haven't really put to as much use as we can is our reclaimed water. In other words, our wastewater that goes to our wastewater treatment plants, where we treat it to an A+ standard. Right now, you know, we haven't taken advantage of that as much as we'd like. We only probably reuse about 5 to 10% of that, if that, even that. We've got plans in place now to begin injecting that back into the aquifer, in the ground, the regional aquifer. And what does that do? Well, we've already reduced our pumping by, you know, 30%, as I said before. If we can we capture about, right now we capture a little more than 45% total well, we actually capture more than 70% of what we deliver to homes that are on sewer. But if you look at the entire system, because the number of homes outside the city limits that we serve water to are on septic, it's about 43 to 45% of our total demand. So if we can take that, the 43 to 45%, treat it to an A+ standard, which is better than when it came out of the ground, and put it back in the ground, that means our depletion is being reduced by another 40% plus. Which really has a tremendous effect in terms of what we can ultimately do in terms of ensuring that we will have adequate groundwater supplies to meet our customer loads in the future, as well as minimizing, if not eliminating, the potential for impacts to the river. And so that's kind of what Cottonwood is doing right now with the new wastewater treatment plant. The plans right now are to inject everything that comes out of that plant back into the ground, with the exception of a small amount that would be used to irrigate the agricultural fields down there. Yeah. We're also trying to, you know, at this point in time, take our reclaimed water from these wastewater treatment plants, and where we've got parks here in the city and school athletic fields and so on that currently use groundwater, get those off those groundwater sources and put them on reclaimed water, which will also minimize the amount of water that we're pumping from the ground, which would be tremendous.
And I know for years now, any excavation work where water is required, they've got to use reclaimed water.
Absolutely.
We have a station up by the wastewater plant where they can come up there with a credit card and get as much water as they need, and that's what they use it. I know the other thing we recently did that's been recognized is provide a reclaimed water line to the vineyards up at Yavapai College.
Absolutely.
So as much as we can reuse that water, the better for everybody.
And everything that we don't reuse, we need to put it back in the ground. And that's what the city's doing at this point in time. Plans for development, future developments, same thing that we're putting in place are requirements that the developers, when they come in, if they're in a location that doesn't make it economical to hook up to current wastewater systems, put in a package plant with the idea that that package plant, the reclaimed water that comes out of that, will be used for any common area irrigation, vineyards, grass, whatever, and what isn't used we put back in the ground. Because that's critical to ensuring that we don't have any impacts on the river, and to also ensure that we will have a source of water that will be available to meet the demands sustainably.
For years to come.
Sustainably.
Well, thanks for joining us, Tom. And you know, one of the things that I participated in yesterday was a tour of one of our water wells, one of our water sites, and the storage tanks and the arsenic systems. And the city, thanks to the mayor, are doing these tours on a regular basis. Even though I'm involved in this day to day, this was really interesting to me too, to go out and really get a first-hand look at what we're doing. It was very impressive. The citizens who were there really enjoyed it. So if you have an interest, we do that both for water and wastewater. If you want to go tour the wastewater site, look for those opportunities. We advertise them through the media, and go out and get educated. It's an important issue for all of us here in Arizona and even in the Verde Valley. Thanks for joining us on Inside Cottonwood, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.